Tuesdays and Thursdays. Tuesdays at 4 o'clock, Thursdays at maybe 3:30. We'll work that out, but those will be in the Language Learning Center. The reason for this is that we need this thing, okay, a smart board. Right? And there are only a few of these around campus. Right? You can see here that I'm usually on campus from about 8 o'clock in the morning until 6 o'clock in the evening. I go off and run some errands. I go to the gym occasionally, but I'm here. And if my door is open, you can certainly come in and do it at any time. I do have some posted office hours, but I'm there pretty much all the time. This is my telephone number. I only have one number. You can feel free to text or call at any time, right? Well, within reason, okay? Between 6 a.m. and 12 o'clock midnight. I think that's a pro what we're going to be talking about. All right, so about this course, about the materials and our approach. Let me say a little bit about language acquisition. All right, Michael, I don't know if you've heard this spiel. Have you heard this spiel? I don't know if we've.
I think in the 275 class.
Maybe in the 275. Yeah. We as Ginger, I don't think has heard the spiel. Have you heard the spiel? Language acquisition. Okay. So we as humans, some linguists, some evolutionary biologists think that the ability to use language in humans is actually an instinct, or the closest approximation to an instinct that human beings have. Right? It is an ability that we have, and it is an ability that we begin using in utero. Before we're born, we begin the process of acquiring language, symbolic language. Other creatures, we know now that other animals also use language to communicate with one another, but not with the kind of symbolic sophistication that humans can. I mean, humans truly are way ahead of the pack when it comes to most species, right? There are some species that do some pretty amazing things, okay? African gray-billed parrots, for example, do amazing things with language. So we are, it is a very interesting, fascinating things about human beings. The one thing about this is that we have this innate ability, which means that the ability to manipulate language is, for the most part, hardwired. I mean, that, in other words, grammar exists in our heads. And what we do when we acquire language is we essentially fit certain parameters of the language into that existing grammatical system to be able to make sense of language. Right? We are extremely good at this. Okay? We are fabulous at this. Acquiring a language is actually something that we all do instinctively without any effort. It is very different than writing and reading. Reading, for example, is not a natural thing. You have to learn to read, right? And reading is actually a very complex process that involves something like over 20 centers of the brain. It involves perception, visual processing, all kinds of things are involved in reading, which makes it far more complex than spoken language. Spoken language is something you learn automatically and subconsciously too. You're not aware of the acquisition of language, but it happens automatically. You can't prevent it. It's like plate tectonics, okay? You can't stop it, right? And furthermore, it's something that happens virtually 24 hours a day in your existence. You dream. In dreams, you use language, right? You are processing language all the time, and so the ability to acquire a language is something that we have throughout our lifetime. We begin in utero, and we will be practicing and using this all the way until we die. Now, along the way, there are certain phases that our ability to acquire language goes through. At the very earliest phase, okay, there is, well, do you know what happens right around 1 year? I don't know if you've had nephews or cousins, or if you babysat or anything like that. What happens to a baby, a child, right around his or her first birthday?
They're able to speak.
Walk, okay? Babies start to walk, typically right around one year old, okay? Which means that they can become disconnected in a physical sense from their parents. Right? So now something incredible happens in the brain. It's like, oh my gosh, we are not, it's potential, the potential is there to not be connected with our parents, which means we have to be able to communicate so that when mom says, look out for the saber-toothed tiger, we understand what that means, right? So right around right around 1 year, there starts this incredible boom in your head of the ability to acquire language, because it's a biological imperative. You've got to know how to communicate at that age. And it's like a firestorm in kids' heads, all right? An amazing amount of their caloric activity is inside their little noggins, okay? It's a pretty amazing thing that happens. And that process continues, and that's why after that, the kids will start talking, okay? They've been immersed in language, and they actually will start talking virtually, within 6 to 8 weeks of their birth. When newborn babies cannot talk. The apparatus that we use to speak with, our larynx, is inoperative for a while, because babies, when they're born, have to drink milk. Okay, drinking and eating are activities that are incompatible with the use of our larynx for communication. Right? That is one of the evolutionary problems that we have. And up until the development, for example, of the Heimlich maneuver, accidental choking was something like the 6th most common cause of accidental deaths. All right, it is because we use this for lots of things: breathing, eating, and communication. So newborn babies can't do that. So when you see, examples of a newborn baby talking, well, physiologically, it's just impossible. But eventually, the larynx develops to where they can begin speaking, and they will mimic the sounds and the noises that they hear around them. And this is also, so the ability or the imperative to communicate is even active in environments that are, for some reason, either visually, or orally impaired. So, for example, in environments where the parents don't speak but use sign language, babies babble with their hands. In other words, it doesn't matter what kind of symbolic language we use. We are hard-coded to do that, right? And it will come out whether we like it or not. So that's what's happening. And so this process continues at this torrid pace until about 6 years old, and then it levels off a little bit all the way up through puberty. At puberty, the language, the ability to acquire language changes. Right? It's an interesting phenomenon, but the ability to develop a native accent essentially, for the most part, disappears at puberty. And that's why people who can live in the linguistic environment for decades never lose their accent or acquire a native accent. It's because physiologically, our bodies say, when we get to puberty, we got to worry about other things right now. Okay, we have developed the muscles, the ability to articulate the sounds in our linguistic group sufficiently by that age that we can then start worrying about other things. For example, procreation, right? In a strict sort of biological sense. So we go through this transformation, and after puberty, we can get very close to a native accent, but it's virtually impossible to get a native accent. And because at that point, we will have formed the appropriate verbal characteristics of our immediate linguistic kinship group, so that we are able to communicate with one another on a communal basis. Right? All right, but the ability to acquire language continues on, not as it was when you're 18 months old or 2 years, but it will continue on. And we can replicate to a certain extent the progress that babies make, sort of instinctually, by applying our knowledge of information to that. So we can actually acquire language fairly quickly, fairly efficiently. Everybody acquires languages at different paces, right? But we can bring to bear to this process our own intellectual experiences and understanding of language to accelerate that process. It is entirely possible for people to live for decades, for most of their lives, in a linguistic environment and never learn to speak the language. This happens all the time. And it happens because the key to acquiring a language is what linguists call comprehensible input. In other words, you have to understand something in order for the language acquisition process to take root. Right? And that's why if it's entirely possible to be surrounded by the language all the time, but if one doesn't understand what one's hearing, then one doesn't acquire the language. And most of the language that we hear and we experience is very complex, right? News programs, radio programs, all of that is very complex language. It's not easy to acquire language in just sort of natural language environments. So we have to, in some way, modify that environment in order for you to experience comprehensible input. So my job is to provide that input in a way that's comprehensible, and that in time, that process will take root and you will acquire the language. You can't help it. It will just happen. Questions, observations? Okay, all right. So let me begin with a couple of I will send you the URL for this information so that you can go through and you can look at it, and we'll talk more about it as the days go by. Greek, you've had Latin, right? You had some Latin, Michael, right? Yeah, tons of Latin. You've had some Latin, yeah. Mm-hmm. So Latin, as you know, is an inflected language, and that means that the words change their shape. They have endings that change according to the word's syntactic role in a sentence, right? Which means ultimately that each word carries with it its grammatical syntactic information. English speakers are at a distinct disadvantage, okay, because we do not use the morphological endings to assign grammatical case or syntactic role. That comes through the position in the sentence. We do it, but we do it automatically based on where a word appears in a sentence. So we are actually at an immediate disadvantage because we are trained, and when I say trained, I mean that we have acquired the ability to process language extremely efficiently. Extremely. So the point where a considerable amount of the cognitive energy that you put into processing language is actually anticipatory, which is why you're perfectly able to finish any sort of sentence, okay, that I might utter, okay, because you know what's coming, okay, and we know what's coming because language is formulaic, right? It seems like there is the potential for infinite sort of creativity and infinite scrambling of words and stuff like that. But the fact of the matter is that almost all of us use language formulaically. And this is really something that we've only been able to observe more recently with the accumulation of very large corpora of language, right? So interestingly enough, the water tape, or the White House tapes, you know, the conversations that Nixon recorded in White House, one of the very first examples of language that was recorded in massive amounts that one could then begin to study. And as it turns out, these huge corpora have yielded some really interesting findings, one of which is, of course, that our language is formulaic. It seems like we're inventing language all the time, but in fact, each one of us has a particular set of formulae that we use all the time. We have certain expressions that we use, certain ways of articulating, and that we manipulate these, we change these depending upon the circumstances, the context. But for the most part, we use a pretty standard palette of language on a daily basis. One of the interesting things, it was thought, there have been different ways of approaching natural language, right, or the acquisition of language. One of the earliest ones was actually in the Greco-Roman world, right, because these Romans, although Latin was sort of the language of certainly the Western Roman Empire, Greek was the language of the Eastern Roman Empire, and so there emerged actual sort of language books, okay, instructional books to teach or to help native Latin speakers acquire Greek, primarily to communicate with their slaves and their household members of their household that were Greek speaking. So this whole notion of having bilingual texts and having a system for people to acquire language is really thousands of years old. Right? And on top of that, then there developed this sort of the other apparatus involved with the acquisition of language, lexica, grammars that describe the language, and so on. So what's come out of that is that what is one of the most sort of entrenched and oldest systems of acquiring language is called the grammar translation thing, and that's what most language courses, certainly in Latin and Greek, were based on for many generations. And it was essentially taking the grammar that these ancient grammarians developed and building out of those grammars a system for acquiring language, which meant that there was a particular sequence to what a person learned at a particular time. This sequence bears no relationship to actual language. To give you an example, most of course, grammars begin with morphology, so you learn the alphabet, you learn the endings and that sort of thing, and then the next thing you learn are nouns, right? Nouns and in their different forms, and then come verbs, right? And when you learn verbs, you begin to learn what are so-called regular verbs. I mean, those verbs that appear most frequently in their various forms, and then you learn irregular verbs, all right? And so it takes a while to go through the morphology and the nouns and so on before you get to the irregular verbs. One of the most common irregular verbs is the verb to be. Ema in Greek, right? And ema is actually one of the 5 most frequently used words in the Greek language. So we will learn the verb to be right now, right? It's irregular. It falls out of the normal grammar translation sequence, but we're going to learn it immediately. Why? Well, because it's everywhere, right? We got to know it, right? Just like a child would have to know the verb to be. All right, so anyway, what we're doing, therefore, is that we now know that that's not how people acquire language. People do not acquire language first by learning the alphabet, and then by learning nouns, and then by learning verbs. People acquire the language in a haphazard way, dealing with linguistic phenomena as it occurs, as they encounter it. Right? So that's what we're going to do, really. And then what we're going to do is we're going to fit this linguistic phenomena that we encounter into different systems to make sense of it. And over time, this system will become clearer as you get a sense of how it's working. Okay? And that's what you're going to do in the thing. So I'm not going to. We're not going to build paradigms, right? You will build your own paradigm, and you'll fill it in with the forms as we encounter them. We're not going to learn the paradigms up front. Why? Well, because we don't encounter all of those linguistic phenomena all at once, right? We're going to learn certain verbs, certain endings, and we're going to learn them as they come along. Okay? Now, this language program is developed actually slightly in parallel with the search program, okay? And it's meant to actually track, and hopefully next year we'll institute this. It's meant to track to a certain extent the first-year humanities sequence, okay? And because the first-year humanities sequence has a lot of the Old Testament in it, okay, the Septuagint, and we're going to read selections from the Septuagint. We felt that it would be better to anchor this language program. It would because one of the important things about understanding or comprehensible input is understanding the context. If we understand the context of something, it's easier for us to understand the language, right? And one of the things that human beings are extremely good at is our stories, right, and narratives. So we have built a narrative around Kyros, Cyrus, okay, who was the king, the first king of the Achaemenid Empire, and so our little language program is built around Kyros for a couple of reasons. One, it enables us to situate the narrative in Asia Minor, in the East, which means that we can pull in what we refer to as the traditional narratives of the East, even though that is a little bit ahistorical and inaccurate. It's not like Cyrus was learning about Abraham, okay? It's not completely unreasonable, but we're taking certain liberties with the historical narrative in that sense. So we're going to follow the life of Kyros from a young boy until he becomes king, and then ultimately at the end of the third semester, his death. Right? And the life of Cyrus is recorded in a variety of sources. One of the most important is the Education of Cyrus, which is a work by Xenophon, a 5th and 4th century writer from Athens. It also appears in episodes from the life of Kyros, also appear in Herodotus's history. He was a 5th century writer from Asia Minor, from Halicarnassus, right? And he was active and lived for a time and wrote in Athens too. There were some other sources as well that talk about Cyrus. The Septuagint mentions Cyrus, for example. There was also another work by Ctesias called the Persica, which was another history of the Persian Empire in which he appears. So we're going to be drawing on some of those sources. So we're going to follow the life of Cyrus from being a boy before because I don't know, you know the story of Cyrus from Herodotus Book 1, where he was a foundling, and his identity ultimately is discovered, and he then becomes, the king of the founder of the Achaemenid Empire, defeats Croesus, and all of those really fun stories. That's what we're all about. Any questions so far?
What will our homework be like?
The homework is really working with these texts.
Okay.
That's essentially all that I want you to do is work. There will be some questions. Almost every assignment will have some questions associated with it, all right? And you will fill out the answers to those questions in your journal, right? And for the most part, I'm just going to ask you to photograph it with your smartphone and send me the thing. In other words, you don't have to worry about learning how to type Greek. If you want to learn to type Greek, I'm happy to help you do that. It's not a problem. It's a good thing to do, but it's not necessary for you to do that. It's fine if you do this in your journal. So there will be little assignments. There might be, we're developing ways of, this is an interesting thing about the process of language acquisition, and this is actually germane to what you do all the time in all of your classes, and that is language acquisition differs from most other subjects, and it is a process, first of all, that's ongoing. Even when, it doesn't matter whether we're in an economics class or a history class or whatever, we're acquiring language, we're acquiring new vocabulary. So this is a process that happens all throughout the day. And in terms of acquiring a language, small bursts of concentrated focus on that, on the L2, scattered throughout the day, is almost as effective as studying throughout the day. Right? In other words, if you work with a language in 15 minutes here and 20 minutes there and half an hour there and an hour there, that is you gain from that an enormous amount of exposure to the language. It works really well that way because the acquisition of language is like physical exercise. It requires a certain amount of thing, but if you do it repeatedly over a long period of time, it happens automatically. It's an unconscious process. Now, there is one characteristic that we have lost, sadly, and that is, and you will remember this, I'm sure, or if you've had nephews and nieces or little brothers and sisters, is that we have lost the ability, most of us, the ability to read something again and again and again. I don't know if you've ever read stories to if you've been babysitting or something, but young kids seemingly have an infinite ability to listen to the same story over and over again. And you probably experienced that. You read them Goodnight Moon, you read it once and they want to read it again. Okay, and you read it a second time, they want to read it a third time. Okay, and we're thinking, seriously? Can't we move on to something else? How about the Hungry Caterpillar? No, I want to hear to listen, Goodnight Moon. And kids have this ability, and it's an unconscious drive, but it's about acquiring language. They know that repetition is the key to it in some bizarre, strange way. One of my favorite, I'll give you two examples from my own family, okay? Sally, this was back in the day of VCRs, Sally would go into the TV room, okay? And she would lie on the floor in front of the television, okay? And she would operate the VCR with her toes. She would watch an episode of Sesame Street all the way through, stop the tape machine, rewind it, and watch it again. It drove us crazy. Really? Can't you watch something else? Oh, she really liked it. Lucy, our younger daughter, listens to The Lion King on tape every night. Lucy, don't you want to listen to something else? How about Pecos Bill? Oh no, I want to listen to Lion King. Life's not fair. I heard that 1,000 times. Okay. And we just, and we get very, so if we read through the story once and we know what's happening, we're done. Because we're all used to getting information. Acquiring language is a completely different process. It's more like musical training. It's more like physical training. It doesn't do you any good to get your exercise clothes on, to run over to the gym, right, and find a 50-pound weight and pick it up one time, and then go back to your room, shower, and you're done. It doesn't do you any good. You might as well stay home, right? The good that comes about is the 30th time you lift that 50-pound weight. Then something's going to happen. But it doesn't happen until you get to that 30th. And repetition is exactly the key to this. So you just have to get used to the notion of reading these passages, these sentences again and again and again and again. It's going to take real discipline. It's hard. Geez, I've read that 20 times. Okay, good. Now we're starting to cook. Okay, now we're getting it. So you're going to have to discipline yourself to do that. And there are different ways that you can do that. You can print out the text on little cards and take them around with you. You can, there's lots of different ways to do that. But the repetition of that is so important. Now that brings me into things like flashcards. Okay, flashcards. I have nothing against flashcards except that they are decontextualized language. And we never, when we're learning our L1, we never encounter decontextualized language. Nobody is sitting there just giving us words, random words, right? They're always contextualized. And so I think more effective than flashcards are really just little cards that might have a sentence on it or a phrase or something like that, so that you're getting some contextualization along with the meaning. All meaning is derived from context, from the relationship of words to each other. Okay? All right. Let's see. All right, so let's get started, shall we? Oh. So this is our brand new website right here. Okay, this is our. And let me show you what we. What's that? What's that?
You're not in here.
Oh. Yes. Did you invite me?
Yes.
Shoot, sorry. Okay. So this is our website. And you can see that we've got some interesting features. So here's our contents. Okay, these are the lessons, right? And we're going to be working on lesson 1. You can see that we have this little toggle here for vocabulary. You can see that the difference is. What's that? We got something weird here going on. Okay, there we go. So you will see that there's a little bit of a toggle here for vocabulary, so that you can turn the vocabulary on and it gives you more information, or you can turn it off and it gives you less information. We'll see that there are also, when we get to other lessons, so let's see, lesson 3 might have some of these. Okay, so you'll see here that these words right here are described over in this area right here. And if you scroll up here, then we've got the vocabulary is there too.
Wow, that looks really good.
It does look good, doesn't it? We're still working on a few things about, for example, different kinds of vocabulary, because some are going to be more important words than others. All right. So now we'll show you later on about certain characteristics of this, but essentially, as time goes on, you'll be able to click on the words, and what the words will do is not take you to a lexicon or anything like that, although there is a lexical capability here, but it will introduce other places where those words appeared, so you can go back first. In other words, one of the important things about acquiring language is that you sort of overcome the temptation to look something up immediately in the lexicon. That's really the wrong way to go about it. You will be tempted, but what you have to try to do is you have to try to mimic what a child does, because a child does not have a lexicon. Okay? A child has to think, what is it? What do we call that? They're little things, okay? They're little teeny round things. They have a hole in it, okay? And they're little teeny things, and they're kind of a beige color, right? They're little, they're just big. They taste so good. I want them all the time, okay? I want them, and I like them especially with milk and some sugar. And I need to know what they are, because if I can't say what they are, then I can't get mom or somebody else to bring them to me. So I've got to figure, so I am going to be listening really hard to see and paying attention to see what those things are called. What are they called? The little round beige things, what are they? I want them right now. I can't ask for them though, because I don't know what they are, right? So I'm listening intently, and then I hear Cheerios. That's what they are. I want some Cheerios. Then I get my little beige things, with sugar and milk. I'm happy, right? I can't look it up in the lexicon. I don't know what it is. I don't even know what a lexicon is. So I have to sort of pay attention, and I have to figure it out from what's happening in context, okay? That's what you need to learn to do with this, to resist the temptation to just go ahead and look it up in the lexicon, but to try to figure out what it is, right, on your own. And then this is referred to as time on task, okay? As it turns out, the more difficult it is, the better the learning, okay? It seems sort of counterintuitive, but that's just the way our minds work. The formation of these synaptic networks requires effort. And if we don't put effort into it, if it's not effortful, then we shortchange ourselves in terms of the acquisition of language. All right, so we've got time for maybe one sentence here. So let's look at the sentence right here, and I want you to repeat after me. Hostis. Hostis, Emma. Ego. I haven't calibrated the board, so I will calibrate it next time. So let's say it again. Hostis. Emma. Ego.
Ego.
All right. Let's read the sentence. Kairata. Philoi. Now note all of these words have marks on them, right? And those marks have to do with the intonation of the word, because the intonation, a little bit like Chinese, as I understand it, that the intonation affects the sound, the meaning of something. So for example, I'm going to give you an example, which is really important. Okay, this is a word, all right, boefe, and I'm going to give you two versions of this. Okay, so there's one version of that, and then there's this version of it with those marks. Okay, so this one is boefe. Say that.
Boefe.
Boefe. Ba-o-fe. Bo-a-the. Bo-a-the. And this is bo-a-the. Okay? Bo-a-a. With this little mark right here. Bo-a-the, as opposed to the bo-a-the. Okay? Here's the difference. This means, let's imagine that you are drowning, okay, and you need help. If you say bo-a-the, it means he, she, or it is helping. That's not the message you want to send, right? You want to say help, okay, which is bo-a-the. So when you're drowning, you want to be able to say, it looks the same, but bo-a-the is what you want to say. You don't want to say bo-a-the, right? Nobody's going to come to your assistance. You say bo-a-the, she's helping. Okay. So that's it. So these little marks are really important, and you're going to hear them, right? Because and as it turns out that in English we don't mark our words with these things, but they do. But intonation plays a role. Okay, so. For example, okay, same word, right? What does that word mean? Compact. What is a compact?
It's an adjective, usually that means compressed.
No, it's not. What is a compact?
It's a little mirror.
It can be a little mirror. Okay. Or it can be what? A compact can be what? What else?
Car, compact disc.
Compact, yeah, can be something small like that. Okay, compact. What about this? Compact.
It's a verb.
Yes.
It's a verb.
Compact.
To compact. Okay, compact and compact, two different meanings, right? And it all has to do with this. This is why using the word impact as a verb, what's wrong with that? Because we accent verbal forms on the second syllable, it should be impact. Okay. Yeah. And we have lots of words like this. How about this one? Conduct means what? Yeah, to lead, for example, an orchestra, or the process of electrons moving through a wire, or something like that. But conduct is what?
It's a noun.
It's a noun, and it means what? Behavior. Right? Okay, so we actually do this all the time too. We're completely, but we're just do it automatically. We don't really think about it. Right? And the reasons why we often don't think about it is because where this appears in our sentence. Conduct will almost always appear in the second position. Conduct can appear elsewhere. Okay. All right, that's all we're going to do today. All right. Thank you for your attention. I just want you to read through for tomorrow. I just want you to read through this syllabus. I'll send you the URL. I just want you to read through it, digest it, get a sense of what's going on, and then we'll start again tomorrow learning the alphabet and what the rest of those letters sound like. Okay? All right, fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we can do 4 tomorrow.
What's that?
We can